It's Magnus Carlsen versus Victor Bologan at the Biel Grandmaster Tournament. A classic matchup, and we're about to see some tactical fireworks. Carlsen opens with d4, and Bologan immediately challenges with the Benko Gambit, sacrificing a pawn on the queen side to gain long-term pressure and open files for his rooks. White accepts the gambit, taking the pawn on a6. Black prepares to fianchetto the kingside bishop, grabbing the sacrificed pawn back and setting up that classic Benko pressure, and right here, Magnus uncorks a brilliant pawn sacrifice, pawn to e4. The idea is to blast open the center, challenge Black's setup, and seize the initiative. Bologan has no choice but to take the bishop on f1, pulling White's king out into the open, and Carlsen plays the only good move. King takes bishop on f1. This centralizes his king, turning a potential weakness into a fighting piece right in the heart of the board. The dust settles. Both sides develop their pieces, and Carlsen's adventurous king finds a safe home on g2. The position is complex, but White is looking good. The middle game begins. Carlsen clamps down on the queen side with a pawn push to a4 and a knight jump to b5, while Bologan repositions his own forces to fight for control. The pressure mounts. A pin from the bishop on g5, followed by a rook lift to a3, and Carlsen is tightening the screws. Black has a critical decision to make, but the move he chooses lets the pressure off. There was a much better way to continue the fight. The stronger path was knight to c7, forcing the rook to b1. Then, knight takes the knight on b5. Pawn recaptures, and rook takes the rook on a3, winning the exchange and keeping the game alive. But in the game, Bologan played the knight to b6, and this allows White to consolidate his advantage. Carlsen calmly shores up his queenside with b3. Black tries to generate some counterplay on the king side by advancing the f-pawn, but White's position is rock solid. Pawns are traded in the center as Black pushes to f5. The pieces shuffle around, each side jockeying for position before the next tactical explosion. And here it comes, a thunderbolt from Magnus. Queen to e6, check. A stunning queen sacrifice designed to liquidate the position into a completely winning endgame. Black is forced to accept the sacrifice, queen takes the queen on e6. And Carlsen plays the only move that wins. Pawn takes queen on e6. This creates a monster-passed pawn and secures a decisive advantage for White. Now it's a matter of technique. The knights become absolute beasts, and Carlsen's knight invades to c7, immediately tying up Black's rook. The endgame conversion is on. A flurry of exchanges on the queen side sees rooks and knights traded off, but when the smoke clears, White's knight on c7 remains a dominant piece, paralyzing Black's forces. Black plays the rook to c8, but this is an inaccuracy that allows White's knight to find an even better square and ramp up the pressure. A subtle but costly slip. But now, a rare slip from Magnus. He lets a huge part of his advantage disappear. There was a much more clinical way to finish the game. The winning move was knight to d5. After the forced trade, knight takes knight on d5, rook recaptures, the bishop moves to f6, and knight takes the pawn on f5, winning another pawn and leaving Black's position in ruins. Instead, in the game, Carlsen plays the knight to b5, giving Bologan a golden opportunity to get back into it, but the opportunity is missed. Bologan fails to punish the mistake and lets Carlsen off the hook. He had a chance to practically equalize. The key was knight takes the pawn on a4. After knight takes the f5 pawn, bishop to f6, the knight drops back to d4, and with a push of the h-pawn, Black creates serious problems. But back in reality, Bologan simply plays knight takes the knight on b5, and the winning advantage is handed right back to White, and Carlsen needs no second invitation. Pawn takes the knight on b5, and he's back in complete control. Another slip from Black, who seems to be crumbling under the pressure. This move lets White coordinate perfectly for the final blow. The better defense was knight to e5. After rook to d1, bishop to f6, knight takes pawn on f5, and then rook to c5, Black would still be fighting. But in the game, Bologan plays rook to c5 immediately, and now White's advantage is overwhelming once again. Now it's pure conversion. Carlsen pushes the b-pawn, creating an unstoppable threat, while Black's pieces are completely tied down and can only watch. A last-ditch effort from Black. He sacrifices his bishop on f2, hoping to create some kind of attack, but Carlsen's king is perfectly safe, and this is pure genius. King to f3. Magnus completely ignores the hanging bishop on c1, understanding that his own threats are far more deadly. An incredible calculation. Bologan takes the bait, rook captures the bishop on c1. But now comes the hammer blow. Knight takes the pawn on f5, the only winning move, and it completely shatters Black's defenses. The king is exposed, and the game is over. One last desperate check, rook to f1. But Carlsen finds the only safe square, an amazing move, king to g4. This dodges all the tricks and keeps all of white's own devastating threats alive. And now, the point is, if black's rook moves to e1, white's rook swings to c4. After rook takes the pawn on e6, the rook lands on c7, and black's position completely collapses. And that was the final straw. Black makes one last mistake in a hopeless position, and it's all over. There was only one way to prolong the game. The only try was rook to e1. After rook to c4, rook takes the e6 pawn, rook to c7, and then knight to c5, but even this is losing. But instead, Bologan plays knight to c5, which does nothing to stop white's unstoppable b-pawn. And here is the final nail in the coffin, pawn to b7. The pawn is just one square away from becoming a queen, and there's no stopping it. And in this completely lost position, Victor Bologan resigns. White wins. A tactical masterpiece from Magnus Carlsen, full of brilliant sacrifices. Black resigned because the threats are overwhelming, and here's what he saw. After pawn to h5 check, the king steps to h4. If knight takes the pawn on b7, white has knight takes the pawn on e7 with check, and after the king moves to g7, white's attack is decisive and the b-pawn will queen.